And I'm sorry to say this, guys, because for under $50, maybe the receive is great, but that transmit audio quality, in about 10 minutes or less, we're going to talk about this radio right here, the Baofeng BF-18H. Is it a Baofeng killer itself? And we're going to talk about all the positive features that this radio has to offer, all the negatives, or at least some of the negatives that I could find that this radio has to offer, because with the good comes bad. And by the end of this video, I hope that you have an informed decision whether or not you want to purchase this radio over other radios like the UV-K5, or the Abri. Actually, they're pretty similar. Nah. So today we are going to go in depth about this tri-band radio, 1.25 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. We're going to take a look at the spectrum. We're going to take a look at the power output, because there's no actual indication of what the power output is from where I purchased this from, nor in the manual. And we're going to take a look at a couple of the other features. Let's just jump into it right now on the table. Actually, before I do that, let's go ahead and just get it out of the air now. A lot of you are offended by anything I do. So let's just get all that offensiveness out of the way by putting my hat on backwards. Can't trust that, reviewer. Let's go ahead and put the headphones on backwards, even though both channels are outputting the same audio. Can't trust that, reviewer. Put on those green glasses that your wife lost. Can't trust that, reviewer. And let's chug some water. A reviewer who drinks water is a horrible person. All right, now let's get started. This is the Baofeng BF-18H. I found it on eBay.com for $35.99. It shipped from China, and I had it in about 2 weeks. I was very intrigued to pick up this radio for many reasons. Number one, it's advertised as a tri-band radio, meaning it'll do 2 meters, 1.25 meters, and 70 centimeters. Number two, it does pick up airband, much like the UV5K. Number three, I was intrigued by the TFT color display. Number four, the listing I found on eBay doesn't show any kind of power output, so I was kind of curious, especially when I saw online many different power outputs all the way up to 15 watts and all the way down as low as 5 watts. I forgot what number we're on. The battery, I saw some people advertising a 6,000 milliamp hour. If you can't do the math, I'll help you out this time. It's 6 amp hour battery on this thing. So mainly, I was curious as an amateur radio operator who's a license to test equipment. I was kind of curious to see what this radio really was, if it's any good. Are there positives and negatives? And that's what we're going to kind of go through today. So when I purchased this for $35.99 from eBay, I received it from overseas in approximately 2 weeks. And I did get the radio with it, a battery that on the back does have USB-C charging. And that wasn't an interest to me. However, I do recognize that that's an interest to some people. Also, the battery being advertised on the back of the battery itself as 1800 milliamp hours. Again, 1.8 amp hours for all you little brains. And I received this charger, which did have no way to actually fit the Baofeng or the BF-18H until you add this clip, which is already kind of broke a little bit, but it still fits. It could only go one way. Now, with all of that, I also received the box, which doesn't really actually have any indications that this is a Baofeng, and it doesn't look like your typical Baofeng box, but I did find it funny that this says it's a digital mobile radio, and it has dual time slot. So that was even more intriguing. But furthermore, the manual, and I will kind of briefly go through the manual. If there's anything you want to see more of, just pause the video, of course. But this apparently complies with RF exposure standards and meets FCC regulations, which, we'll get into. And furthermore, if I continue to go through all of this manual, I'm not going to go through it, but there's no indication still of the power output that this radio here has to offer. So I did receive this, I charged it up, and I want to kind of take you through my first experiences with this radio. Number one, putting the radio all together. And when you get this out of the box and you charge everything up with the charger, you also have to plug the battery in, the antenna, and if you want the belt clip, you could put the belt clip on as well. But the first observation I made was, yes, it says it's an 1800 milliamp hour battery. And furthermore, it's really interesting how the back of the radio, the battery recesses into the back of the radio to keep it from having a fat profile. But also, there's a little bit of a seal here around the battery terminals, and furthermore there's a screw that goes onto the radio and a USB-C cover. It's almost like they were trying to waterproof this. And we might try this out here in a little bit, depending on how the harmonics look, right? As I plug this in here, I basically went the top of the battery in first in an angle, and then I brought the back of the battery down where I'll screw this in if I could find a screwdriver. Regardless, if you had a belt clip, which I don't know exactly where I put it, you would place it on here before placing the battery into place, okay? So unscrew these two screws, place the belt clip on, screw them back on, and then put the battery in. And I did forget to mention that you have one of these increasing horsepower wrist straps that come along with your radio if you so choose. Then we take a look at the actual antenna, and as we screw the antenna in, it's fairly simple. You put the antenna in the antenna port and you screw it in. However, you probably want to know that this is an SMA male on the actual radio. So if you wanted to purchase a aftermarket antenna, you would get an SMA female that's not recessed into the antenna. Screw it in, and I mean, even something like, well, nope. Yeah, screw in this fake Nagoya antenna, and there is your aftermarket antenna. My initial observations with this radio as I picked it up, installed the battery, and everything along those lines was there's a really solid feel to this. It's actually really heavy. Without the belt clip, this is about 10 ounces, okay? And like I said, though, it is a solid radio. I would tell you that this radio has the feel of something like, and I hate to make that comparison, but almost like actually, yeah, almost like the same kind of feel and weight as a TYT MD380. Although the Baofeng is a bit larger. That's why they're about the same weight. But regardless, I was impressed by the fact that it appeared to have some kind of water protection capabilities, which we'll test, and it had a bulky feel to it. Now, when I turned it on, I didn't understand a word they said. But fortunately, the manual was actually very helpful in telling me what settings I needed to access to get this thing into English. And its menu, and then we're going to go down to the third option, and then I believe the 10th option.
Enter.
And then you get that smooth voice. Listen to this guy.
Enter. 1 4 6 5 2 0.
He sounds smooth. Okay, now that we're inside the radio and we have it set to English, there are a lot of things that I want to talk about, but I want to summarize as well. Number one, the changing between the channel mode and the frequency mode does take a while. You have to hold down the menu key, which is the green key, for quite a while, and eventually it'll switch between a memory mode and a VFO mode, if you will. So I'm in VFO mode now, and you're going to see that I'm on airband. This perhaps is the best sounding radio under $50 that I've ever heard. And if you know me, I don't sugarcoat things. I don't beat around the bush. You're going to see that in a little bit too, because there are problems with this radio. But I need to give appreciation to how good this sounds. First, I'm going to take it to NOAA Weather Radio. Again, we're on the stock antenna, okay? And this is NOAA Weather Radio near my house.
Heat and thunderstorms, including severe weather, appear to be on Thursday. Spotter information statement.
Let me give you just a comparison here to two radios, the UV5K or K5 and the Yaesu FT60. Now, I'm not dissing either of these radios, but I want to compare.
Was reported. The temperature was 63 degrees. The dew point was 54, and the relative humidity was... Smoke was reported with a temperature of 61 at Rockford, 63
this
at
is
Milwaukee,
the FT60.
Wisconsin, and 65 at Madison, Wisconsin.
To me, they both sound great. The audio on the Yaesu might have a slight advantage, but for $35, this is by far phenomenal. So I'm going to listen to the UV K5 now.
Tonight, partly cloudy in the evening, then becoming mostly cloudy. A chance of showers and thunderstorms.
That was the UV K5.
Evening, patchy smoke after midnight. Lows in the mid-60s.
That was the BF-18. Again, UV K5.
The precipitation 40%. Thursday, partly cloudy with a chance of showers and thunderstorms. Highs in the upper 80s inland, but but only in the mid-80s.
What I'm trying to show you is there's a much fuller audio on this Baofeng BF-18H, and I really appreciate that full audio, whereas this sounds a little less tinny. There's probably a better speaker in here as opposed to the UV5K. But, you know, unfortunately, there are some other issues we are going to discuss. Before I do that, though, let's compare air bands on this radio, the BF-18H, as well as the UV5K or K5, and then the FT60 even. And to do that, I'm using antennas, okay? I'm not going to go too hard into it because we're listening to how well the audio sounds, okay?
2 Merc 29, 23, good issue.
While I'm waiting for somebody to talk on the air bands, which is sometimes uncommon, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share this with a friend. Or if you don't like it, an enemy. Here's an afterthought. I'm going to hook these all up to the same J-pole so that there's a somewhat equal comparison, and I'll let them run for like 10 minutes each and then cut up the audio. So good luck. Okay, I'll leave it for real this time.
4000, accept at 545.
Maybe just a slight adjustment.
We have nothing on our end, and there's nothing we could spot for accept at 535.
Hey, I'll turn out 200-375 Kilo Romeo. 3355 Kilo Romeo, good day.
3587, Mike Joe. Alright, Phil's at 3000, radar now 16, 373 Romeo, 8.9 Romeo.
My observations are that the BF-18H for under $50 has the best sounding audio I've ever heard on a under $50 radio. The receive on airband, it's pretty subjective because I don't have an actual monitor to show, but I would say that the receive is probably comparable to the FT60. Now, in a further episode or a later episode, we're going to go ahead and put all these airband receivers in a whole like battle royale, and we'll find out who has the best receiver if I can find myself a monitor. And if you have one and you're in the Illinois area, yeah, let me know. I'd love to get together and we could test these all out. But I then moved on to testing the radio for power output, because what good is an amateur radio if it doesn't put out a lot of power, or if it has dirty spectrum? And that's what we're here to take a look at now. Some of these websites have offered that these are up to 10 watts of power, and some people are falling for it, which is very unfortunate. That's what I'm trying to prevent. It doesn't matter. If you have a BF-18H at this current moment, I would almost guarantee you that it's not going to do more than 5 watts. But how much did this one do? At 145 megahertz into a dummy load, using LMR 400 connected to the SMA, I was getting 1.35 watts out on low power, and on high power 3.74 watts. Again, the radio battery was fully charged. I'm very well aware of that. 146 megahertz, 1.41 watts on low power and 3.8 on high power. So we're about a watt short. And then 147 megahertz, 1.47 watts on low and 3.8 watts on high power. If we jumped up to the 220 band, which this is advertised as being able to do 220, I will tell you that my meter, which is an MFJ meter, didn't register any power output on here, but I was able to dispel that was kind of false. I just think it's such a low amount of power that it's not actually showing the power output because my meter can't read that low. And we'll probably clarify why that's happening in just a few moments. But then I moved up to UHF, or 70 centimeters, and yeah, 2.75 watts on low power at 446 megahertz and 3.46 watts on high power, 448 megahertz, 2.65 watts and 3.12 watts. So I would say that the maximum output power of this radio is only about 3.75 watts. Let's be a little generous and say 4 watts of power output. The next test is everybody's favorite test to hate me on. Spectrum purity. And yeah, we've seen some dirty radios in the past and we've seen some clean radios in the past. Where does the Baofeng BF-18H stand? Well, to be fair, on 2 meters, I tested this with a 30 dB attenuator, which put me at around negative 21 dB when I keyed up on low power. And that means that I should have been somewhere around negative 61 or less, I think it would be. So negative 61, negative 62, negative 63 in order for this to pass. And unfortunately, this was right at negative 58. So even though it was a fairly clean signal, a lot cleaner than some of the radios we've seen in the past, there is just a little bit too much of a spike there in the spectrum purity. And it would fail on 2 meters, but it's close. In fact, it's so close now that I think about it, even using a Regal DSA 815 analyzer and some really nice cables, I am in an area that's not controlled, and there could be a margin of error. So even though I say it failed, there could be a margin of error. I went up to UHF and I tested it. UHF looks great. UHF looks clean. And it would be the A-OK for UHF, almost like this was supposed to be a GMRS radio. But then, and probably the reason on 220 or 1.25 meters, we didn't see much power output is because this really wasn't made for 220 megahertz. What they did is they unlocked the radio. Now, if you go back and you look at that chart, negative 34 dBm, negative 33 dBm, that's with a 30 dB attenuator. So if we're doing the math even further, that's negative 4 dBm. And of course, if we go power times W equals 1W times 10 over P dBm over, or let's just Google it and do the power conversion formula for dBm to watts, we'll see that negative 4 dBm is 398 microwatts, and that is most likely why we didn't see any power output with our MFJ meter. And it's transmitting, but there's no filtering on here. But furthermore, it is dirty, very, very dirty. I would not transmit. I'm not saying to violate the law. I'm not giving any legal advice, but I would be okay, I guess, transmitting on 2 meters sometimes if needed in an absolute dire emergency. And 70 centimeters would be fine, but 1.25 meters is a what they would call a splatter box. So those were my findings, and I'll put them up here on the screen as well. Feel free to pause it and take a look at them further. For my next trick, here's what we're going to do. I went to 446.025. According to the Illinois Repeater Association band plan, this is a frequency that is valid for voice use in my area. Now, I have to say that because somebody will get sad if I don't. Now, what we're going to do is I chose 70 centimeters because perhaps very clean on the spectrum, and I want to adhere to the rules and regulations of the spectrum purity. I'm going to go to the other room and I'm going to transmit, and you're going to be able to hear the audio quality of the BF-18H as it is right now into the Yaesu FT60. Let me go ahead and put the microphone down.
This is W9FFF Whiskey 9 Fox Fox Fox. Is this frequency in use? Nothing heard. This is W9FFF testing the audio quality on the BF-18H and the Yaesu FT60.
You know, I didn't necessarily like the way that sounded. Why? Because it sounded like there was a buzz in there, which might be caused by surrounding electronics. So I'm going to take this outside with my cell phone and record it where there should be no electrical interference, and that should give you a better indication of how this sounds.
I'll check one more time. This is W9FFF. Is this frequency in use? Nothing heard. Very good. This is W9FFF testing the quality of the BF-18H in an outdoor environment with the Yaesu FT60. W9FFF clear.
Just a few moments ago, I was talking about how well this radio received audio, but more importantly, how well I could hear the audio on here because of a full sound. And I'm sorry to say this, guys, because for under $50, maybe the receive is great, but that transmit audio quality, it's freaking amazing. I'm sorry to say this, and a lot of people may disagree, but for under $50, that transmit audio quality, like they used a good microphone, like they have some like kind of processing in there, it's just doing a job, but it sounds really good. So it is unfortunate that this radio doesn't meet the requirements for spectrum purity on 2 meters and on 220, because this could be a radio that a lot of people are interested in. And you're probably at this point wondering, hey, idiot, you didn't tell me how far I could talk. Yeah, because I hear that comment all the time. And I can't tell you. Well, if you wanted me to force a number on there, I say, hey, you could talk up to 90 miles with this little radio right here. Now, for a more technical explanation is it depends on a lot of things. Are you in a microwave? You know, are you in a Faraday cage? Well, that's going to affect your distance. Are there heavy trees and heavy shrubbery between you and 2 locations? That's going to affect your distance. Is there a clear line of sight? Is there a clear line of sight and you're both very elevated in the air around no electrical interference whatsoever? So I can't answer that question except by saying up to 90 miles, you know. Regardless, this radio is going to transmit just as well as any other radio in the price range. As far as the battery goes on this, yeah, we could talk about, it did take about 3.5 hours to charge it from fully dead using the cradle, and a significantly longer time using the USB-C. The USB-C is not intended to be, with any of these inexpensive radios, usually USB-C is not intended to be the primary source of charging these radios, and it could actually double the time it takes to charge the radio. So with that, yeah, about 6 hours or so with the USB-C, I kind of fell asleep. Of course, we just talked about the radio briefly and some of the things a lot of people like to see. But what about programming this thing with the computer? It uses a Kenwood-style programming cable, which means a Baofeng cable should work. Is there a CPS for this or a programming software, or can I use Chirp? Let's find out and hopefully not get a virus again. All right, took a break, ate some breakfast, feeling better. Ow. Feeling better, and regardless, now that I'm feeling better, I did find Michler.com or Michler.com. He is a very reputable individual who posts CPSs for the Baofeng software as well as other information on Baofeng. And the CPS that I located said UV17 greater than symbol 22. So I think he meant UV17, 18, 19, 20, 21, and 22, and then it said Pro on there. With that, I downloaded that code plug software. I ran it through some online scans to make sure that it was safe for me to put onto my computer. And Michler's been pretty reputable over the years, but I always recommend that you do your own diligence in checking the file. And then after I downloaded that code plug software, I downloaded it. I plugged in my radio and turned my radio on. Let's go into the code plug software. I'm back to factory defaults on here. And let's just kind of just take a look briefly and show that it reads and writes. I'm not going to show you how to program everything, but I might just look through it here real quick. Here we are in the code plug software, and the first thing that you might have is you might have a bunch of Mandarin script. If you do, just click on the fourth option on the top here, and then go down to language and click English. Now, if you downloaded it from that site, it's probably already taken care of for you. The next thing is your model. Now, UV18 Pro, I guess, is the same as UV18H or BF-18H for that matter, because once I select that, I can go to settings and I can make sure that my COM port is correctly listed, which it is. And then I'm going to click on read. When I click on read and I have the radio on and I have the programming cable plugged in, click start. Now on your radio, you'll see something that says program as it's reading the radio. Now that it's finished and we click OK, we have a channel information list and it shows a list of our frequencies that are in there. But since we're back at factory defaults, there's not too much in there. So maybe we take this and we type in 146.520, which would be a receive frequency for a simplex, right? And then that would mean that this is the same frequency. Okay, it's already kind of auto-filled it. I'm not going to go into details about repeaters and everything, but I'd be more than happy to at another day. With that, we're just going to click on right here and click start. And now that it's finished, our radio turns off and it no longer says program, but what we could do is if we click the up and the down arrow, we'll see what we can go between the different channels. Channel 100, channel 1, channel 100, or 2, channel 100, channel 1. So, you know, it works out. And with that, it was really simple to program once it found the code plug software. It does not work so far that I'm aware of as of right now of recording. So, you know, in 18 months when you find out that it's now supported in, you don't have to cry that I was wrong. But it doesn't seem currently to be supported by Chirp. I didn't look too much into it, but I don't see any indication that the UV17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 software is yet supported by Chirp. Let me just double check that real quick. Currently, Chirp and RT systems, as of a month or two ago, are not supported yet, but you never know. Now, you could save up to 1,000 channels into the memory mode, but what's really cool is you could save in banks. What are banks, right? Well, I talked about this in my Yaesu episode recently, but each bank has 100 channels that you could save in. And let's say that you frequently travel 10 places in the United States. maybe you have different banks for those 10 places you travel. Your frequencies, after all, are going to be different in Chicago than they are in Los Angeles, than they are in... does anybody go to Maine anymore? But you could basically set up those different banks for those different areas that you frequently travel, or different repeaters that you like to hear based upon the time of the day or whatever it might be. Different banks, up to 1,000 channels. We're getting toward that 30-minute mark here, where I got to make that ultimate decision to continue this episode forever and have people complain, or quit this episode now and have people complain. So I guess I'm choosing to have people complain. But with that, I do want to point out just a few more really quick things. I did find the access in the menu to be, although very navigatable and understandable, kind of slow to access. And so when you go into the menu and you're scanning, it is a little bit of a delay between the time you hit the button and you navigate that menu. But with that also, it is a nice screen in order to see things. I don't have a problem seeing that at all. Everything is crystal clear. Even if I take off these glasses here, I can still make out everything. I like the contrast on here. And then furthermore, the scan time. When you set up a scanning sequence, if you will, in between frequencies, for example, 146 to 147, the scan time is also fairly slow, and that might be adjustable. Hey, I came here today to do a couple of things. 3 things, actually. Number 1, I came here to give you an overview on the BF-18H. It was going to be a 10-minute overview, which turned into a 30-minute overview, which could be a 3-hour overview. During this time, I gave you a lot of the good that I see in this radio and that I hear in this radio. Some of the not so good, stuff that could be fixed, maybe, power output and so forth. And then finally, some of the stuff that's just horrendous, like that splatter on 1.25 meters. I'm not here to tell you to buy this radio or to avoid it because I'm the ham radio police. I don't care. I just like to take a look at radios and show people my findings, and I hope you enjoyed that. And number 2, my goal today was to hopefully give you 1 or 2 chuckles throughout the video by letting you experience some of the comments that I receive on an hourly basis. And then number 3, of course, was hydrate. Because it will offend somebody. Until next time, I'm glad, or I hope you liked this video. And if you did, let me know in the comments below. This channel is Ham Radio Dude 73. I'm going to go create several fake accounts so I could tell him that his grass isn't green.